Judas Iscariot is one of the most controversial figures in religious history, remembered almost universally as the betrayer of Jesus. His name has become synonymous with treachery. Yet when we examine the biblical texts, early Christian writings, and later theological debate more closely, a deeper and more difficult question emerges: was Judas simply a corrupt disciple driven by greed, or did his actions serve a necessary role within a prophetic and predetermined framework? According to the canonical Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Judas was one of the original 12 disciples chosen by Jesus. This alone is significant, because the selection of the 12 is described as deliberate and purposeful. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus is said to have chosen the 12 after a night of prayer. Judas is included in that list from the beginning, not added later. The Gospels identify him as Judas Iscariot, possibly meaning man of Kerioth, suggesting Judean origin, which may have made him culturally distinct among several Galilean disciples. The Gospel of John provides the most negative portrait, describing Judas as the group's money keeper and stating that he stole from the common purse, though historians note that John was written later than the Synoptic Gospels and reflects more developed theological framing. The betrayal narrative appears in all four canonical accounts, but with meaningful differences in emphasis and detail. In Mark, the earliest written gospel, Judas goes to the chief priests and offers to hand Jesus over, and they promise him money. No motive is deeply explored. Matthew adds the famous detail of the 30 pieces of silver and later describes Judas' remorse and suicide. Luke introduces a theological layer, stating that Satan entered into Judas, suggesting spiritual influence rather than purely personal motive. John's Gospel intensifies this further, portraying Judas as increasingly aligned with darkness and opposition. The betrayal itself is described as taking place in the Garden of Gethsemane, where Judas identifies Jesus with a kiss, a gesture that becomes symbolically powerful in Christian tradition as the sign of false loyalty. Yet alongside these narrative elements, the Gospels also contain repeated predictions by Jesus that he would be betrayed by one of his own. At the Last Supper, recorded in multiple accounts, Jesus states that one of the 12 will betray him. In John's account, Jesus even identifies Judas indirectly by handing him a piece of bread. This introduces a theological tension that scholars have debated for centuries. If the betrayal was foretold and necessary for the fulfillment of prophecy, how should Judas' responsibility be understood? Several New Testament passages connect the betrayal to earlier Hebrew scriptures, particularly Psalms that reference betrayal by a close companion. Early Christian interpreters saw these as prophetic foreshadowing. This raises the issue of foreknowledge versus free will. If the event must occur to fulfill prophecy, is the actor fully free or tragically bound into the role? Church theologians have historically answered that foreknowledge does not remove moral responsibility, that knowing an act will occur is not the same as causing it, but the philosophical tension remains unresolved. Outside the New Testament canon, the debate becomes even more complex. In 2006, scholars published a restored Coptic manuscript known as the Gospel of Judas, dated to roughly the 2nd century and associated with Gnostic Christian groups. In this text, Judas is portrayed not as a villain but as the only disciple who truly understands Jesus' spiritual mission. According to this account, Jesus privately instructs Judas to hand him over, describing the act as necessary to free the divine being from the physical body. Most mainstream biblical scholars and all major Christian denominations reject this text as non-canonical and theologically inconsistent with earlier sources, but its existence demonstrates that early Christianity was not unified in its interpretation of Judas' role. Historically, it is also important to note that the Gospels were written between approximately 40 and 70 years after the crucifixion, based on oral traditions and community testimony. This does not invalidate them, but it means they are both historical and interpretive documents. Differences in detail, including how Judas died, illustrate this. Matthew states that Judas hanged himself. The book of Acts describes a fall in a field resulting in death. Scholars have proposed harmonizations, but the variation shows layered tradition rather than modern journalistic reporting. The famous 30 pieces of silver also carry symbolic weight. The amount corresponds to a value mentioned in the Hebrew Scriptures and may function theologically as well as historically in Matthew's narrative. Some historians argue the payment detail emphasizes prophetic fulfillment more than transaction record. The moral evaluation of Judas has also evolved across history. Early church fathers universally condemned him, yet some later theologians described him as a tragic figure, one whose wrongdoing was real, but whose role was paradoxically embedded in the salvation narrative. Modern scholars sometimes analyze Judas psychologically, suggesting disillusionment, political expectation of a militant Messiah, or forced acceleration of events. None of these theories can be proven, but they show how interpretation continues to develop. What remains historically consistent is this: without Judas' identification of Jesus to the authorities, the arrest in that specific moment and manner likely would not have occurred. Whether that makes him the central villain of the story or the most tragic participant depends on how one interprets prophecy, intention, and freedom. Across theology, history, and textual study, Judas Iscariot remains not a simple character, but a deeply contested one, positioned at the intersection of betrayal, destiny, and design. The question has never fully disappeared, and perhaps cannot be settled definitively: was Judas the destroyer of the story, or the necessary catalyst within it?